Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And a very good evening. Selamat malam, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the IAIS ISTAC MAPIM webinar on Israel's attempt at normalization in Nusantara. We are indeed delighted to have three distinguished speakers with us tonight to discuss on the above topic. Professor Dr. Azyumardi Azra, Senior Professor of Islamic History and Culture, Faculty of Adab and Humanities, Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University UIN Jakarta. Assalamualaikum Prof. Bapak.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Apa khabar?
Baik, sehat walafiat. Alhamdulillah.
How's the situation of COVID-19 in Indonesia now?
Yeah, it's terrible now because I think Indonesia now the lockdown has been extended for another 5 days up until the end of this week. But I think
recording in progress.
They are going to extend it until the end of this month.
I see. So does
recording
in Malaysia
stopped.
So it's also in Malaysia, we are also experiencing quite a high number of these COVID-19 cases and also high number of deaths amid COVID-19. So we pray that Allah Subhanahu Wa Taala is as our burden. Thank you very much for accepting our invitation, Prof.
Yes.
Tuan Haji Azmi Abdul Hamid, President of the Consultative Council of the Islamic Organisation of Malaysia, MAPIM. Assalamualaikum, Tuan Haji.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Tuan Haji is well known, we call Cikgu Azmi. So yes. You are now, if I'm not mistaken, in Kedah, in Merbuk. So
the situation is okay. I managed to get out of KL for the 8th Adha, and I'm still at my home now in Kedah. Things are quite good, but the number of our COVID is quite increased in the state of Kedah today.
I see. Number. But I think for the last 2 weeks or a week before, it was, I think the number was a little bit, I think, low in that sense.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think MAPIM accepted to become one of the co-organizers in this program.
Thank you.
We also have Dr. Ahmad El-Muhammady, Assistant Professor at the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, ISTAC, of the International Islamic University of Malaysia. Assalamualaikum, Dr. Ahmad.
Waalaikumsalam warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Apa khabar?
Alhamdulillah, bikhair.
So thank you as well to ISTAC, accepting our invitation to become the co-organizers. Alhamdulillah, ladies and gentlemen, for the first time, online activism around the globe has driven a groundswell of support for the Palestinian cause, with even many global personalities and Hollywood celebrities openly chastising Israel for their recent onslaught on Gaza and violence in Jerusalem. Throughout the barrage of international condemnations, however, Israel found unsuspecting opponents in the form of Malaysian and Indonesian social media users, to the point that official mouthpieces of the IDF and other celebrity proponents of Israel felt the need to directly respond to them. The Malay Nusantara nations, often represented by the three Muslim majority countries, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei, have always been ardent supporters of the Palestinian cause. On 15 May, the three nations issued a joint statement condemning in the strongest terms the repeated blatant violations and aggressions carried out by Israelis targeting civilians. As a result, the three Nusantara nations have always been a subject of special interest in Israel's rigorous campaign of normalization, and this was reiterated by an official address by the Israeli ambassador to Singapore, Sagi Karni, on June 17. Under this backdrop, this webinar, jointly organized by IAIS Malaysia, ISTAC, and MAPIM, will be discussing the imminent challenges and opportunities in facing Israel's normalization campaign in the Nusantara, particularly given the latest the latter's rich cultural, religious, political, and historical background. Before I pass over to the speakers, let me briefly introduce three of them. Professor Azyumardi, as I mentioned earlier, is a senior professor of Islamic history and culture at the Faculty of Adab and Humanities, Syarif Hidayatullah State Islamic University, UIN of Jakarta. He is an outstanding historian, a progressive educator, an Islamic intellectual who has earned high esteem for his advocacy of a centrist, moderate understanding of Islam. He has rendered great service to the development of Islamic studies in Indonesia and to the formation of harmonious society. His intellectual and practical activities have contributed greatly to cross-cultural understanding in international society. Tuan Haji Azmi Abdul Hamid, who is currently the President of the Consultative Council of the Islamic Organization of Malaysia, MAPIM, the President of Teras Pengupayaan Melayu, Teras, and co-chairman of Secretariat Perhimpunan Sejuta Umat. He is now struggling for the plight of Palestinian Muslim, Syrians, Rohingyas, Uyghurs, and Kashmiris who are being oppressed by providing financial contributions and basic needs. On 3rd January 2015, he was conferred with the Award of Tokoh Mahijrah Negeri Pulau Pinang 1436 Hijrah. Dr. Ahmad El-Muhammady, as I mentioned earlier, is an assistant professor at the International Institute of Islamic Thought and Civilization, ISTAC IIUM. Besides that, he holds various external positions, such as Associate Fellow at the International Center for Counterterrorism, ICCT, based in The Hague, Netherlands, and International Advisory Committee member at Global Peace Institute, GPI, United Kingdom. Since 2011, he works closely with the Special Branch Counter-Terrorism Division, Royal Malaysia Police and Prison Department to implement the rehabilitation and de-radicalization programs for the individuals detained under terrorism laws in Malaysia. With that brief profiles of the speakers, let us begin with the first presentation. I would like to call upon Professor Azyumardi Azra for the first presentation. Over to you, Prof.
Terima kasih banyak Tuan Azam Adli, yang terhormat, yang saya takzimi, saya muliakan Presiden MAPIM, Tuan Azmi Abdul Hamid, kemudian juga Associate Profesor Ahmad El-Muhammady dari ISTAC. Of course, I am not a new person in Malaysia. I have been visiting a professor in many Malaysian institutions, university-related institutions like ITA or what is that at UKM? I forgot. And also, of course, now I am one of the international advisor of ISTAC, together with Karen Armstrong and also John Esposito, and with, of course, with Professor Osman Bakar.
Indeed.
I am very happy to be. I'm still now, external examiner for PhD dissertation and also for the promotion of lecturer into associate professor and from associate professor to full professor, UM or UKM and other Malaysian universities. Actually, I wrote a PowerPoint entitled "Indonesia, Jews, and Israel: Impact of Islam in Indonesian Foreign Policy." Of course, later I would be very happy to submit this PowerPoint to the organizer if you need it. Yeah. First of all, I would like to my basic argument about Indonesia, Israel. I'm not going to deal with Malaysia or Singapore, but I will talk only about Indonesia and Israel. I think Tuan Azmi will talk about Malaysia or probably also Singapore. First, Israel has been attempting in vain to establish certain kinds of relation with Indonesia, diplomatic and or trade. Israel regards official relation with Indonesia is very important because it represents recognition from the largest Muslim country to Israel. So that's very important. That's why Israel has been attempting from time to time. But at the same time, Indonesia has been consistent not to open any kind of official relation with Israel, trade or political or diplomatic or religious or something like that. Muslim groups in Indonesia, mainstream and splinter. What I mean by mainstream is the what we call in Indonesia is wasatiyah Islam, wasatiyah middle path Islam, or justly balanced Islam. The term used by director of IAIS, Professor I forgot. Middle justly balanced Islam. Yeah, represented by big organization like Nahdlatul Ulama or Muhammadiyah. They are mainstream. They are middle path, and also but splinters. Splinters means group of Muslims sometimes who are hardliners, yeah, if not radicals or extreme in Indonesia. And then, but all these different kinds of Islamic Muslim groups in Indonesia oppose the opening of relation between Indonesia and Israel. Indonesian government and Muslim groups consistently take side with Palestinians in their struggle against Israel. Most Muslims perceive the Palestinian struggle and are identical with Islamic struggles, even though, of course, Palestinian struggle actually nationalist struggle, because you can find also non-Muslim important non-Muslim individual or leaders within Palestinian ranks. Now let's take. I would like to talk a little bit about the history of Jews in Indonesia, in the so-called Kepulauan Nusantara or Nusantara Archipelago. The traces of Jews in the archipelago begin with the spice trade route in pre-Islamic period. Jewish sources mention the coming of Jewish traders to Barus. Barus is a village on the coast of west coast of Sumatra. Jewish traders were mentioned to arrive in Barus in 1290. 1290. And there were also some tombstones with Star of David, and with Hebrew alphabets in Kerkhoff Cemetery in Banda Aceh, and also Kembang Kuning Cemetery in Surabaya. In fact, there was a synagogue in Surabaya named Bet Hashem, which was constructed in not long time ago, actually 1948. Yeah? And surprisingly, after Indonesian independence, but the synagogue was demolished in 2013, on which land a 17-story hotel was constructed. In 2004, a synagogue, Ohel Yaakov, known also as Sar Hasamayim, was founded in Tondano, North Sulawesi. North Sulawesi, by the way, is a majority Christian, majority province in North Sulawesi. Muslims are minority in North Sulawesi, so that's why it is safer to construct a synagogue in this area. In fact, there is also almost 19 meters high menorah nearby. Menorah. It is said that this menorah is the tallest in Asia. Now there is a religious dimension between Indonesia and Jews. Despite post-World War II anti-Israel attitude, so I would say that anti-Israel attitude in Indonesia gained momentum only after post-World War II with the declaration of Indonesian independence. But since the time of Dutch colonialism, there were actually some Jews who made the Dutch East Indies, that is in this, of course, the Nusantara archipelago, as a land of sojourn. In fact, in 1857, three rabbis, in Netherlands appealed to the Dutch government to allow Israel Benjamin, a Jewish leader, to come to Nusantara archipelago to form a solid Jewish community, such as founded in West Indies or Suriname. In fact, they plan also to construct a synagogue in Netherlands Indies. But their appeal was rejected by the Dutch government. In 1861, another Jews came to visit Jakarta, Batavia. He noted there were some 20 Jewish households in Batavia. Most of these Jewish households came from Germany and Netherlands. They were rich merchants. Yeah, that's typical Jews. Yeah, they were merchants. There was in fact one single Jewish trader who was very influential in Batavia at the time. Now let's talk a little bit about Jewish demography. The Jewish demography in the Nusantara archipelago begins to form since the time of Portuguese, when the Portuguese came to Malacca first, and then of course then Portuguese were affected by the Dutch, and then they went to eastern part of Indonesia, and then there were some Jews among the file and ranks of the Portuguese. And then I already mentioned there were 20 Jewish households in Batavia in 1861, around 40 people in 1862, and 3 households in Surabaya. During Aceh War between 1873 and 1904, the Dutch brought a unknown number of Jewish mercenaries from Russia, Romania, Hungary, Austria, in fact also some Jews from Iran and India, in order to support the Dutch in their war with the Acehnese. In fact, in 1901, there were some Jews in various cities, 28 in Padang, West Sumatra, 5 in Gombong, Central Java, and 20 in Semarang, also Central Java. In 1921, Israel Cohen, who visited Java, speculated that there were some 2,000 Jews in Java. But this number was refuted by other Jewish sources, which estimated only 600 Jews in the archipelago. And according to Dutch population census in 1930, the Jews number 1,095. Currently, there are some 200 Jews in Indonesia, descendants. They are Indonesian citizen, descendant of Jews during Dutch time, and newcomer Jews holding a passport of different Western countries. So they are Jews, but they hold American passport or Australian or whatever. Now, before Indonesian independence, actually Jewish were very active in Indonesia. The rise of Indonesian nationalism in 1920s also saw the rise of Jewish activism in Nusantara archipelago. In early 1920s, an association for Jewish interests was founded in Batavia. In 1926, a monthly magazine, surprisingly, Eretz Israel, was published surprisingly in Padang, in West Sumatra, Eretz Israel. But can you imagine that? but it ceased publication only in 1942 with the coming of the Japanese. In 1926, Jews residing in Padang and Surabaya formed the Dutch East Indies Zionist Association. This Zionist Association was very active in fundraising to support the Zionist cause to establish a Zionist state, Israel. Their activism ended on the eve of World War II. Yeah. Now let's talk about Indonesian foreign policy after independence. Indonesian foreign policy since the time of President Suharto. Of course, you know that Indonesian independence was declared on August 17, 1945. The first president was President Sukarno, and the foreign policy of President Sukarno is based on the preamble of 1945 Constitution, stating that the independence is the right of every and all nations. So that's why any kind of colonialism and neo-colonialism on earth should be abolished because it is against humanity and justice. This stated in the preamble of Indonesian Constitution. Indonesia should also play an active role in the creation and implementation of world order based on independence, sustainable peace, and social justice. That is why Indonesia consistently opposes Israel on the one hand and takes side with the Palestinian on the other. Now let's see how Indonesia deal with Israel during the so-called All Order Orde Lama of Sukarno, All Order Orde Lama of Sukarno. Since the time of its declaration of independence, Israel has been trying to get recognition from Indonesia, whose government called All Order. I mean, Sukarno government is called Orde Lama, All Order. At the end of 1949, Israeli President Chaim Weizmann and Prime Minister David Ben-Gurion congratulated Indonesian President Sukarno and Vice President Muhammad Atta on the Dutch transfer of power to Indonesia, official transfer. This was soon, even though Indonesia, of course, was declared independent for years before, yeah, in 1945. Only in 1949, the Dutch recognized Indonesia, did transfer of power to Indonesia. This soon followed by recognition by Israel government of Indonesian independence. In January 1950, Indonesian Vice President Hatta sent telegram thanking the Israeli leaders, but fell short of recognizing the state of Israel. In response, Israel Foreign Minister planned to visit Jakarta, but Vice President Hatta asked him to postpone without giving any date. So the visit actually was rejected. Yeah. And then, as a host, this is again the policy of Sukarno. As a host of Asian Games in Jakarta in 1962, Indonesian government, All Order Orde Lama, pemerintah kerajaan or pemerintah Orde Lama government refused to issue visas for Israeli athletes. Indonesia was suspended. As a result, Indonesia was suspended from membership in IOC, International Olympic Committee. President Sukarno put the Israeli-Arab conflict into the frame of new conflict between new emerging forces, or NEFOS, versus all established forces, all the force. And Israel was categorized as all the force because it was supported by Western countries. Indonesia launched Games of New Emerging Forces, or GANEFO, in Jakarta in 1963 as an alternative to the Olympiad. And President opposition, Sukarno opposition to Israel, on the other hand, and then support to Palestine on the other, is fully consistent with the points in the preamble of Indonesian Constitution. Now, that's that Indonesian policy during Sukarno. Now, let's see Indonesian-Israel relation, or not Israel, between in the New Order Indonesia, pemerintahan Orde Baru Suharto, Presiden Suharto, Orde Baru. The New Order, or Orde Baru Indonesia under President Suharto, basically follow the patterns of Indonesian foreign policies implemented by all other Sukarno government. That's why President Suharto rejected the Israeli occupation of Palestinian land and supported the formation of an independent and sovereign Palestinian state. But later, for pragmatic purposes of national development, which was in need of Western financial support, President Suharto took a moderate position by, for instance, supporting peace talk between Israeli and Palestinian and other related Arab states. Continue with President Suharto. In 1974, Indonesian Suharto government stated that it would allow the Palestinian office, the establishment of Palestinian office in Jakarta in 1974. But this was materialized only in 1989, yeah, with the opening of Palestinian embassy. In 1992, Indonesia convened the Conference of Non-Aligned Movement attended by Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. But in the post-1960 wars, Indonesian high-rank military officer established contacts, underground contacts actually with their Israeli counterparts that resulted in the armament trading. So Indonesia bought some armament from Israel in 1970s. Now, the last time in Suharto is the contact between high official and of two countries become more open. President Suharto accepted the visit of Yasser Arafat on September 13, 1993. But Suharto also accepted the visit of Israeli leader Yitzhak Rabin on 15 October 15, 1994. 1 year later, President Suharto again met Yitzhak Rabin in Washington, D.C. In 1994, four prominent Indonesian Muslim leaders, including Abdul Rahman Wahid, the chief leader of Nahdlatul Ulama, attended a seminar in Israel. They were also present at the signing of Israeli-Jordan agreement. But there was no any kind of official relation formed between Indonesia and Israel until President Suharto was resigned in May 1998. Now we come into the time of reformasi era reformasi or reform in the post-Suharto era. The reformasi era began with the long-held power, some 30 years of President Suharto in 1998, and the introduction of liberal democracy up until now, liberal democracy. Political liberalization also resulted in political fragmentation. There is a lot of political fragmentation in Indonesia up until now. Muslim groups have become more assertive in their efforts to influence domestic and foreign policies of government. Opposition to Israel gets stronger and stronger, particularly from hardliner groups having transnational connection and political agenda. For instance, of course, like groups like Hizbut Tahrir. Of course, now Hizbut Tahrir has been banned in 2017 was banned. During reformasi, the first president of post-Suharto era, post-Habibie, President Abdul Rahman became president in 1999 to up to 2001. He was impeached in 2001 because of misadministration and because of controversial policies. But Abdul Rahman Wahid, as a former president and former leader of Nahdlatul Ulama, once when he was president, proposed that Indonesia should open trade relation with Israel, and of course he soon backed off from his plan because of strong opposition from many Muslim groups. On May 4th, 2004, former President Wahid was given an award of Simon Wiesenthal Center, Los Angeles, as a friend of Israel in the Islamic world, as reported by the Israeli newspaper Haaretz. Indonesia continues to stick to two-state solution and open honorary consul in Ramallah in 2016. Yeah. originally they planned to open Indonesia planned to open an embassy in Ramallah, but of course it is opposed by the Israelis. Vice President Muhammad Yusuf Kala, Vice President of Jokowi, not as a Vice President of Susilo Bambang Yudhoyono, as a Vice President of Jokowi, he met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during UN General Assembly in September 2018. But there is no follow-up of the Kala Netanyahu meeting, even though Yusuf Kala argued that if Indonesia would play a role to create peace in between Palestinian and Israeli, and then Indonesia should open a diplomatic relation. Indonesia should talk with the Israeli also. This is what is his argument. Now, Indonesia is very active in Palestinian human resources development. This is during the Reformasi era, by enjoining Palestinian in many kinds of formal and non-formal training, including, on my campus, there are some Palestinian students studying medicine and many other sciences. Indonesian philanthropy organization become very active in providing reliefs and also constructed an Indonesian hospital in Gaza in 2015. And now, of course, the hospital was actually damaged a little bit during the last siege by the Israel. I think 2 months ago. And now Indonesia is in the process of building another Indonesian hospital in West Bank. Indonesian religious tourism among Muslim and Christian to Jerusalem, Ramallah, and other sacred places in Palestine is getting popular. And then number of Jews and rabbi coming to Indonesia increases, including, of course, using non-Israeli passport, because they cannot enter Indonesia by using Israeli passport. I think that's it. My time is up now. I should stop, even though I still have some pages to show, but let's see. Let's stop. Let's stop at that point. Thank you very much. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Waalaikumsalam. Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Azyumardi. I think it is quite a fascinating presentation from the historical perspective and what is taking place between Indonesia and Israel. I think one of the an eye-opening to the historical perspective of the settlement of Jewish society in Indonesia, and you did mention that, and I think perhaps in Malaysia, but I don't know because we don't have any representative from the expert of in history, but perhaps Dr. Ahmad can perhaps share with us later if he can, whether there was also a Jew settlement in Malacca then, because Professor Azyumardi did mention about settlements of this Jew society during Portuguese time. And I think it is quite fascinating from the historical perspective in Indonesia until the Order Lama and Order Baru. And I think the Order Baru, or the new order, seems that there is a relaxed perhaps approach by the then president. But I think it is opposed by, the Indonesians, the Muslims at large. So that would be something quite interesting. There are quite a number of points if I want to raise, but I think I just leave it there at the moment. Perhaps I will leave it to the audience, the viewers, both from the Zoom as well as our FB viewers, to ask and to comment on this. Thank you very much, Professor Dr. Azyumardi. Now we move to Tuan Haji Azmi Abdul Hamid. Tuan Haji, perhaps you can share with us your thoughts on this Israel attempts at normalizations in Nusantara, in particular in Malaysia.
Okay.
Over to you, Tuan Haji.
Thank you. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah. Salatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah wa ala alihi wasallam. Thank you, Dr. Azam and the speakers or the panelists. It's an honor to have me participating this in a very interesting topic. It is relevant. It is now up to a very important discourse for us to decide whether there is a future of such an attempt called the normalization with Israel. The Nusantara, I begin with because the topic is about this attempt by Israel to normalize. Then we say the Nusantara. Now, Nusantara is, well, essentially it's an Indonesian name for maritime Southeast Asia. And that was the history. And generally it means the Indonesian archipelago. But in the wider sense, the Nusantara in the modern language uses include the Malay-related cultural and linguistic lands, and namely Indonesia, Malaysia, Singapore, Southern Thailand, the Philippines, Brunei, East Timor, or the Timor-Leste now, and even Taiwan, but it does not cover the Papua New Guinea. So the area Nusantara is such. Now, if you talk about let me go to the broader part of this discussion. We very well know that there is an expansionist policy of Israel towards many corners of the world. And now they are seeing Southeast Asia as one of a very important target, because you have the biggest Muslim population in the world that is stationed in the Southeast Asia, the Nusantara area. So I want to share with you that over the past 2 decades, before I go into the Malaysian context, over the past 2 decades, Israel has developed what we call a very robust bilateral relationship with China, with India, and Singapore. And also they have forged ties with Japan and South Korea. So that expansionism of relations has become very active these past 2 decades. But most recently, Israel has devoted considerably to strengthening its relationship with Southeast Asia, particularly Philippines, Thailand, Vietnam, and Myanmar. Cambodia, it is covered by Bangkok. So they do not have, they have a relationship, but they do not have, Israel do not have an embassy. But these other countries, they do. So the more focus of the relationships falls into the military security cooperation in the form of arms trade, and also technology transfer. This has been the frontiers of relationship that they want to engage, because Israel is the 4th largest trade exporter of the world with its technology. Now, the Israeli defense sector, which is expanding its horizon, this is a very well organized, and the workers are highly unionized, the industrial workforce of peace, and they produce a wide range of defense products, from small arms to artillery pieces to even sophisticated electronic systems. So that's the catch of Israel. To anywhere that it wants to, build up a relationship, that strength is always been forwarded with. Now, Israel is emerging as an important source of defense equipment for the Southeast Asian nations. Now, these Asian clients have openly made known their preference for Israeli-made weapons. system, particularly because of Israel's so-called non-strings attached policy, where you just buy arms what you want, regardless of any government who are ruling. So because of that, then the Southeast Asian nation wants to deal with Israel more closer. And then if you look at why the military spending is going up, the demand for arms imports have steadily increased in Southeast Asia over the last probably 10 to 15 years. There are some key drivers of this build-up. One is because of the surging economy of the region. You know, the region has this strength of an economic development that is promising. Number two, because of the aging equipments of the military that they want to modernize, they want to update. Number three is because the desire to promote that local industries related to arms. So that is why they want to relate themselves with Israel, and because Israel is a very advanced stage. And then there is this issue of the heightened security concerns related to these unresolved maritime territorial disputes. This, you know, the China thing, they are very assertive, their behavior, they are trying to control the South China Sea, and the, you know, claims of the borders and all that. So that relates to the security concern, and therefore all the nations of South Asia wants to upgrade the defense system. And then there also a notion of a threat of violent extremism that is always been narrated. That is why we need more advanced arms, and also to address to the persistent insurgent activities. So with these few things as a background, now the real politics and the strategic interests of Israel to come into the Nusantara is almost very, very clear. The increasing demand for defense items due to this so-called emerging security challenges, and they want to have more advanced technology in their defense industries. Now Israel seems to be the answer to meet the requirements of the Southeast Asian nations. And then let me then go into, with that perspective, we go into the Malaysian, what you call the Malaysian scenario, right? The history goes back to probably about the 9th century. The existence of the Jews in Malaysia, more from this group called the Sephardic group. They come, Malacca is the touch point. They started from there right until the 18th century. Malacca has been the concentration of Jews way back then. Most of them comes even from the Baghdad, where they arrived as refugees. And the first named in the record of Jews in Malay, the land of Malaysia, by the name of Aaron Manasseh. There's a first name recorded as a Jew who came to Penang, and then he lived there for 30 years, and it developed, you know, from 1881 to 1941, from the range of 30 persons of Jews. It goes up, and then by 1941 it was reduced to 30 because a lot of them migrated elsewhere when the Japanese came in 1941. In fact, there was a synagogue in 1929, but it was demolished in 1996. Sorry, 1976, if I'm not mistaken. By 2011, that was the end of the Jewish community presence in Malaysia. You know, 2008 there was about 100 refugees coming from Russia So that was a bit of that history. And then they, in Penang, we have even a Jews road. We call it Jalan Yahudi, but it was then changed to Jalan Zainal Abidin. There is a cemetery in that road where the Jews were buried there. So the remnants and the legacies stopped until probably was all cleaned up by 2011. That's the most recent recorded history. All right, now if we go into the Malaysian context of relations with Israel, I think we are quite similar with, very similar with Indonesia. There's been a very consistent foreign policies of Malaysia and on Israel that we have rejected to recognize Israel, although Israel has, with the support of the British and also the Americans, they are in 1948 they came into existence, and immediately in 1949 they become member of the United Nations. They develop diplomatic relations with 964 countries that time, until recently to 20 we add another 6 countries or 4 countries which have normalized and recognized Israel and established a diplomatic relationship. Now the number has gone to 168. Knowing that this is how Israel is very, very aggressive in making their move to have relationship with countries as many as they can, but we know very well that they are really concentrating to resolve their situation in the Middle East, because that's where they are positioned, and therefore they wanted to make sure that the isolated policy of the Arab and the Muslim countries toward Israel can be ended. So they wanted to take that strategy of engaging with the Arab countries, and if the Arab countries can have a change of policies toward Israel, then that should then be brought into this Nusantara area, because there is high respect of Islamic studies, Islamic scholars over in the Middle East that influences a lot of the Muslims in Nusantara. So if you have scholars in, for instance, in Azhar, even in Saudi, saying that it's okay to have a relationship with Israel, then that gives a strong message that we should then, review our position in Nusantara. So that is why the agenda from Trump's era being the forefront of this so-called deal of the century, and also from there they have the Abraham Accord, and they try to persuade and even buy over some of the countries of the Arab, we know United Arab, and then we have Bahrain, we have Sudan, we have Morocco. These 4 countries have already normalized, but this is with a price. Wherever they are able to do that, there is a price to be paid, and once they can buy over these countries, the leaders and all that, then they say that this formula or this strategy can be done also in Nusantara. Okay, coming back to Malaysia, with that is history, we know that there are several instances that we have to just put it on record on how Malaysia is dealing with Israel. Very clear that we are not recognizing Israel, but then there are instances, just like Professor Azyumardi was saying about the experience of Indonesia, presidents making certain moves. In Malaysia, it's also the same thing. It is very clear that during even 1994, we have Tuanku Abdullah, Tuanku Abdul Rahman, he's the brother of the Agung that time. He finally admitted that he went to Israel. He went to Tel Aviv on a business venture. So that created some news in the country. And then, of course, during Tuan Mahathir, we have instances of an issue where we allowed the cricket team in the international cricket championship, allowed the team to come into Malaysia. Then that created an uproar, street demonstrations. And after that, that was 1997. But then 2008, it came again when there was a friendship tournament of football, soccer between the Chelsea, I think the Chelsea team from England, where two of the players were Israel, and we allowed them to come in. Again, there was a protest by the people in Malaysia. It was twice actually they came in, and Malaysia were alleged as to become racist, and the Football Association of Malaysia was demanded to apologize, to make an apology, and we did. Malaysia did apology that we should not have sort of allowed people to boo the players who were, one of them or two of them were Israelis or were Jews. And then we have an incident later on where it was also said that in 1994 in France, Tuan Mahathir had a sort of a meeting with the Prime Minister of Israel, which he denied that there was no verification on that, but it also created a news. After that, we have this incident of the Prime Minister who took over from Abdullah Badawi, that is Najib Abdul Razak. The issue came in a parliament where there was a question by Anwar Ibrahim about why Malaysia appointed a company from Israel, APCO, to rebrand Malaysia. Rebranding Malaysia, the concept of Israel is one Israel. So it was alleged that that one Israel is translated into one Malaysia. So that kind of debate was very hotly discussed. We were paying like millions of dollars for this contract. And then there was another one on this issue of the Asia Soft issue. This is telecommunication. It has to do with it was based in Singapore, and Singapore it is owned by Jews, by Israeli. Then it got a contract in Malaysia, so that was also exposed in a way. Also debated. We have also this Pantai Hospital was bought over by a company from Singapore, who's the owner is Israeli. He bought about 34%, I think. So that was seen to have indirect, control over the Malaysian sector of telecommunication. So and then of course we have even very shocking intrusion of the Israel. One last 2 years was the assassination of one of the Palestinians in Malaysia, Dr. Fadi, was assassinated in one morning, and then we just couldn't get the assailant. And then there was this flight that came and used the Malaysian airspace. This is not the first time. There was once before, but then that again gave us the idea of how Malaysia, Israel is closing in to Malaysia, and that is why, as I think Professor Azyumardi he mentioned that during the last Gaza assault by Israel, Malaysia, Indonesia, and Brunei made a common stand that they condemned this, and that's how this Sagi Karni, the diplomat of Israel, in an interview in the Jerusalem Post, say that Israel is very keen to have an engagement and the relations with the three countries of this Nusantara. And remember also that they also announced that they are trying to also hunt down the Hamas everywhere in the world, and it was mentioned one of the country that will be highly there will be surveillance. They're going to hunt down Hamas in Malaysia, probably Indonesia, in this part of the corner of the world. So with these events and things that are happening, let me just give my last part of my presentation. Are all this an attempt to go for a normalization? I guess it is. They are eyeing this area. There's no doubt about that. If Indonesia is persuaded and in somehow whether although we have all the indirect trades is really happening for years already, but they want a more clear relationship with Israel. I think the reason to target Indonesia is very clear, because it is the biggest population of Muslims, and there are already history of pieces of Indonesia is breaking away from Indonesia. They've been tried with Aceh, and then they managed with Timor-Leste or Timor, and then the Maluku. All this happening, I think they are using the advantage of divide and rule, and I think they will use all their intelligence to always see the opportunities, the windows that they can come in. But as far as the Nusantara, more of Malaysia and Indonesia, that's the concentration that we definitely have to put an eye. Brunei has become a bit outside of the whole debate because it's very exclusive in that way, but God knows there may be any attempt. But coming back to the normalization attempt of Israel on Nusantara, because of the factors that given just now, we are surrounded by Israeli embassies around the Nusantara. Embassies in Bangkok, embassies in Singapore, in Philippines, in India, embassies in Thailand. Meaning that we are sort of, Nusantara is already there, the Israelis there, is here. It's just making that, from formal engagement, but indirectly, I think a lot of things they're looking at. If you can't go through economics, for instance, we had a very bad experience of George Soros, the Jews that diluted the Malaysian economy way back in 1997, if I'm not mistaken. That is an experience how Malaysia or Nusantara can be manipulated in that sense. I mean, they have the capacity doing that. Meaning, if you can't do it, and they can also go through many other sectors, whether it's education, science and technology, in health, in agriculture, in telecommunication, you name it. They have the strength to come into the Nusantara, offer a very, a very interesting offer. Maybe any government, any leaders in the Nusantara among the Muslims that can be persuaded, God knows. They wanted to look very moderate. They wanted to look very liberal. They say that, we have to be pragmatic and therefore we have to engage. God knows. But I think the strength of rejecting this normalization is still very strong now, especially among the people, especially among NGOs. I think we have to stay on that course. Anybody who's coming into the government, we must make sure that there is no compromise on this issue, and therefore we need to make sure that we strengthen our unity among the Nusantara, make sure that we are consistent with the Palestinian cause. We want Palestinians to come back to their sovereignty. Whether it's two-state solution or whatnot, that's a different matter. But making sure that the rights, the dignity, the freedom, the liberation of Palestine will be backed by Nusantara Muslims in this part of the world. So that's my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tuan Haji Azmi, for that. Fascinating again, the presentations. And I think you did touch on the historical perspective of the Jew settlement in Malaya then. And I think perhaps not only in Malacca, but also in Penang. And you have gave us with regard to the numbers of the population. And one of the things that you shared, there is Jalan Yahudi in Penang, which
Yeah.
has been changed to
Yeah.
Jalan Zainal Abidin, if not
Yeah.
mistaken. And
Yes.
then the attempt of this Israel to normalize in this part of the world in Nusantara. I mean, you reiterated what Professor Azyumardi mentioned, and then take into the position of Malaysia, how this attempt of normalization has been taking place indirectly. Uh, as for examples, you mentioned a few of them. The cricket team, as well as the recent one would be the what we call it uh, the the the, uh, the Pantai groups,
Yeah.
hospitals, where the company is based in Singapore, where quite a number of the shares are from them. So I think in your last few words of your presentation, I think you have made it very clear that uh, from these three Muslim Nusantara nations, put aside of Brunei, Malaysia, Indonesia, we have to be united to make sure that normalization, attempt of this normalization would not be there, despite there are four countries you mentioned from Muslim that have taken initiative to do that. I think with that, we would like to thank. There are perhaps, I suppose, I do have a question pertaining to this, but I will leave it to the audience later on. So thank you then. We move to Dr. Ahmad El-Muhammady. Dr. Ahmad, could you please share your thought on this subject matter that we are discussing? Over to you, Dr. Ahmad.
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Azam. Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alamin. Wassalatu wassalamu ala ashrafil anbiya wal mursalin wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. Distinguished panelists on Haji Azmi, Professor Dr. Azyumardi Azra from Indonesia, distinguished participant, ladies and gentlemen. I bid you welcome to this discussion, and I believe that the discussion is very important, and I would like to congratulate IAIS Malaysia for organizing this discussion tonight. I do not have a PowerPoint presentation, but I do have several points to share with the audience and also with the panelists. I believe that what set off the discussion for tonight's event is actually a statement made by the Israeli ambassador to Singapore, Ambassador Sagi Karni, on the June 17, in which he expressed his intention, representing the state of Israel, for a formal diplomatic relation with Malaysia. Well, and because of that, therefore, there are a lot of responses and feedback and reaction from the governments and also from the public. I would like to look at this issue from first is from the standpoint of the ambassador of Israel. He actually made the statement at this particular time and in his capacity as the ambassador. So here, I think we should understand one thing. What Karni is doing is actually sending off the diplomatic signaling to the people in the region. Diplomatic signaling in diplomacy is actually a kind of statement or also a verbal, non-verbal, formal and informal statement made by certain representative from one country to a specific target group in that region or in another country. So in this context, I would say Ambassador Karni, when he made the statement that Israel is keen to establish a formal relation with Israel, with the countries in the Southeast Asia, he did not target or he did not aim that statement to the public. He is actually speaking to the ruling elites, uh, those people who are in the Southeast Asian countries, meaning the government and also the institutional bodies in that country. He did not speak to the public. He's speaking to the ruling elites or the governments. Number two, he is actually know the background story of that relations. So we have listened just now in the case of Indonesia presented by Professor Azra and also from Malaysia, Tuan Azmi was speaking about it, giving the historical background of our contact, I would say. It is not like a formal relation, but it is a contact. So he know the history of the contacts from the beginning. Given his capacity as the ambassador, he has learned a lot. Actually, not many people perhaps aware that the contact between Malaya before we gain independence and also Malaysia later has been very extensive. Actually, uh, since the pre-independence era, I can mention a few cases, a few attempts made by the Israeli diplomat. For example, there is a one Israeli diplomat by the name Moshe Sharetz, who came to meet with Tengku on the 14th of October 1956, actually 1 year before the Malaysia gained independence. So before Malaysia gained independence, Sharet came to Kuala Lumpur and met with Tengku in the capacity as the ambassadorial level. And he said to Tengku that Israel has the intention to establish formal diplomatic relation with Malaysia. And Tengku, according to the report, he said that Tengku was favorable without hesitation in the beginning. This is one, I think it is similar with the contact of Indonesia. With the pre-independence of Indonesia, the mood was quite favorable or without objection. So in this context as well, in Malaysian context as well, the author of this article, he said that the Tengku response was favorable without hesitation. And he actually said he welcomed the proposal with pleasure. And however, Tengku said the idea has to be approved by the British Foreign Office, as it was responsible for foreign relation until Malaysia's independence. So remember, this was happened before 1 year actually before Malaysia gained independence in 1957. So now what happened after the independence? So after the independence, he came back again. He came back to Malaysia and asked for this promise. He said that, okay, you have promised that we can uh, establish a formal diplomatic relation. Actually, on the 26th August, the Prime Minister David Ben Gurion sent congratulatory letter to Tengku and told him that Israel was ready to establish appropriate representation in Kuala Lumpur. And he also, actually, Israel also voted to accept Malaya in the United Nations. So whenever Malaya gained independence, he came back to Kuala Lumpur and seek to return the favor. He said that we help you in the United Nations. Uh, so you have to fulfill that. So he came back to Malaya and asked again what happened to the promise that he made before. So that was in the 1957, and after that, he was told by Malaysian diplomat in the United Nations that Malaysia is in no hurry to establish that relation. So I think that uh, during that time, Tengku was very instrumental in this context of accepting the offer. So Tengku has no problem in having that relationship established. However, after the independence, I think the mood has changed. So on the 10 November 59, Israeli envoy to Indonesia, Moshe Yoval, reported that he has met the day before Tengku visited Australia. So among other things, Tengku told him, I remember my conversation with Mr. Sharet, ambassador of who came to see him before. So he said that what happened right now. However, Tengku said, we cannot do so because of the resistance of opposition from the Arab nations. So that is another hindrance, obstacle. And later, he also mentioned that, okay, uh, in the inside the country, there was also strong opposition from outside the party, that is Tengku's party, the alliance, and also from inside the party. So that is another factor as well. And another thing also he mentioned about the confrontasi with Indonesia. Malaysia has experienced confrontasi, and during the non-line movement meeting, so Malaysia need to get support from other members, and so therefore he need the support from especially from the Arab countries. However, as you know, the Arab countries are not in favor of supporting or having established relationship with Israel. Therefore, Malaysia need to go through that or need to follow those demands made by the Arab nations. So the attempt was continued until Tengku resigned, and then Tun Razak came, Tun Hussein on. The status quo never changed, and it take the worst turn whenever Mahathir became prime minister, because Mahathir making a lot of statement which is actually anti-Jews, anti-Zionism, and anti-Semitic, according to the report. So because of that, Israel made no attempt to establish that relation. However, there was a trading activities happened between Malaysia and Israel, and also visit, especially from Malaysia visiting Jerusalem, and also among the Christian group, Malaysia demanded the same thing. You say that if a Muslim can go to Jerusalem, the Christian also demanded the same thing. So they were also requested the Ministry of Home Affairs to give them permission, which actually the ministry gave that permission for them. So when Mahathir resigned, and the status quo remained, Paklah foreign policy remained, Najib remains up to the 2018, then the Barisan Nasional is no longer in government. We have a new government. I think in Tel Aviv, they watched this development closely. And of course, Mahathir became prime minister, and he made the statement in New York, actually the similar rhetoric that he made about the Israel anti-Israel statement. But now, if you look at the situation today in Malaysia, Mahathir is no longer the prime minister of Malaysia, and he has a less influence comparatively as the period that we have seen during his administration and also after. So the statement made by Karni is actually very, very timely in his view, because he believed that right now Malaysia is under the different leadership. That is number one. Number two, as I said earlier, one of the obstacles that Malaysia has in order to establish a relation with Israel was the opposition from the Arab nation. Right now, the Arab nation has established a formal relation with Israel. Egypt, Jordan, UAE, Qatar, Oman, Morocco, Sudan, Saudi Arabia, even considering establishing a normalization, a tatbi'. So there is no longer obstacle, if we look at from that perspective, from in his view, on Malaysia's leadership to establish normalization with Israel. That is the second point. The third point is the internal opposition. The internal opposition, which is mentioned in this article by Moshe Gegar, he said that the internal opposition is coming from the Islamic political party, which is PAS, Parti Islam Malaysia. Right now, PAS is part of the government. So there is no longer internal opposition in that context. So it is part of the government, and if we look at PAS right now, it has evolved uh, very radically in terms of ideology, in terms of political maneuvering. It is unbelievable. So this is another factor that they have taken into consideration, and because of that, I believe he make this statement is actually based on the current realities of today. And I would like to mention the last one. The last one is about geopolitics. the state behavior is not determined by emotion. It is determined by the political realism. The Hans Morgenthau composed a book and item and outlines six principles of political realism, in which he mentioned that uh, the state behavior is not based on morality, it is not based on religious principle, on ethic, but it is based on the strategic interest. I believe that decision for normalization, which is taking place in the Arab world and in other nations as well, it is based on this principle, geopolitical interest, and also the interests of the nation. And I believe that Malaysia has been very pragmatic from the beginning. Remember, Malaysia is ready to accept two-state solution. Two-state solution actually is a partial recognition of the existence of Israel. Partial recognition, meaning that we are ready to accept the existence of the Jewish state in Palestine, in Samaria, and in Judea. We are ready to accept that. And we also ready to accept the existence of the Palestinian state in the same land. And there is another point as well. I think it is very important. I think everybody who study Middle East politics and also the Arab-Israeli conflict will understand this. The issue of Arab-Israeli conflict is very complicated. It's not as straightforward like any other conflict in the world. If you look at the situation in Palestine right now, there is a conflicting response from the Palestinian itself. For example, while not accepting the existence of Israel, Fatah is negotiating with Israel. Hamas also joining election and win the election in Gaza. And they also, to some extent, having um, contact, dialogue between this Israel. So, however, if you look at the constitution of Hamas, Hamas is Harakatul Muqawam al-Islami, the Islamic resistance movement, meaning that the existence of Hamas, the resident date of Hamas is actually to oppose the occupation of Israel. However, if you look at the behavior of Hamas, there is certain level of resistance, there is certain level of negotiation, there is certain level of dialogue which is taking place. Of course, it's facilitated by the Arab nation as well. For example, Jordan. So what is going on right now? You know, we have been trying all avenues in dealing with Israel. You know, the Muslim world has gone to war to fight against Israel. The Arab nation banded together fighting Israel, and they lost the war too. They also go for negotiating table, try for talk for peace agreement. They have tried. They also try to fight the war of attrition. Hamas is doing is the war of attrition, try to weaken the spirit of Israel, try to instill fear in the citizen of Israel and also the Palestinian. So right now, I believe that when it comes to normalization is the last resort and it is done by a few states. I think that it is based on the geostrategic interest, based on, I think enough is enough. We have seen a lot of suffering, not only to the Israelis, but also to the Palestinian. And if you look at the situation in Gaza, there are a lot of people who are living in a very bad situation. There are a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD cases, and there is also fear. So, who is winning now? Israel. You know, there is a one thing that I learned when we look at the Israeli-Arab conflict is the concept of victory is different. You know, Israel initially they believe that victory victory means whenever you pulverize Gaza. They did that. But for Gazan people, they have nothing to lose. Actually, by doing so, they give them ammunition to fight even more. They fought, and they will send the suicide bombers to Tel Aviv and Jerusalem and to kill this. So they instill fear in the heart of the Israeli people. Actually, Israel the foundation of Israel is built upon fear. That is the identity of the Jewish state. Because of fear, they build the state. The fear of everyone, especially the Palestinian. However, if you look at the situation in Palestine recently, there is a kind of soul searching among the Israelis. I can mention two names here that maybe the readers and the listeners can go through that. One is Ami Ayalon. Ami Ayalon was the commander of Israeli Navy who raided the Mavi Marmara ship from Turkey. So Ami Ayalon was a commander in that raid when he was in the Navy. When he retired from Navy, he joined Shin Bet. Shin Bet is equivalent special branch in Malaysia. And he became the director of Shin Bet. What he said that to fight terrorism, you need to be empathy. You need to understand the Palestinian. And you need to see them as human, not enemy. To me, it's quite surprising for the director of Shin Bet who made the statement that we need to see Palestinian as human being, as friend, rather than as an enemy. Because Shin Bet, his main responsibility is to arrest Palestinian, to put the Palestinian in jail, and if necessary, to kill them. And he said that he killed a lot of people. Second person is by the name Chaim Gans. Chaim Gunn, who wrote a very interesting book. I think you can see this book. His book is A Just Zionism on Morality of Jewish State. He said that the Jewish state is built upon conflicting dreams, conflicting vision. In one hand, if you look at the Declaration of Independence, if you read the Declaration of Independence on the State of Israel, which is created in the 15th of May, 1948, the Declaration of Independence for the state Israeli state, uh, the state of Israel will be open for Jewish immigration and for the ingathering of the exile. It will foster the development of the country for the benefit of all its inhabitants, all, including the Arab. It will be based on freedom, justice, and peace as envisaged by the Prophet of Israel. It will ensure complete equality of social political rights to all its inhabitants, irrespective of religion, race, and sex. It will guarantee freedom of religion, conscience, language, education, and culture. It will safeguard the holy places of all religion, and it will be faithful to the principle of the Charter of the United Nations. That ideas form the identity of the Jewish state. That is number one. Number two, I believe that the Jewish people also, if whether they admit or they do not admit, they believe in the greater Israelis, the greater Zionism. So how can we reconcile between greater Israel with the Declaration of the Independence enshrined in that constitution? So this is conflicting dreams. So how to solve this problem? To solve this problem is returning back to the democracy, because Israel, they believe that they are the only democratic state in Middle East. So if you claim that you are the democratic state in Middle East, why do you treat the Palestinian discriminately? So I think this is the things that I would like to share. And I think that for the last point, this normalization will continue to come. And I believe that if that happens, we have to be ready to move forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ahmad El-Muhammady. I think another fascinating presentations with regard to this normalization, precise normalizations, in particular in Malaysia, where you shared from the historical perspective, you give some instances how before independence of Malaya then in 1956, there was an attempt and there was a move uh, to have this diplomatic ties in Malaya, and after independence, meeting back with Tunku Abdul Rahman, that promised that. I think it was fascinating to the extent that at that time it was quite I mean, if I say, open to Israel to have diplomatic ties in Malaysia. And of course, you said that after independence and during Mahathir's time, then you can see a different scenario. But you did mention how these uh, attempts that made by Karni, because of the different leadership that we have in Malaysia, as well as the no opposition from the Arab countries, where quite a number of them have had diplomatic ties with Israel. And one of the good points that you did mention is the opponents from Malaysia, mainly from past, where now they are part of the government. So it has changed a lot, and that would be something that we need to consider. Of course, you mentioned about some other points with regard to the geopolitics, and one of the good examples you did mention that Malaysia recognized this two-state solution, meaning that you are recognizing the existence of the state of Israel. That will be something. So, at your last point, you mentioned that normalizations by Israel is taking place, which is very, very soon. Will be materialized. We don't know when, but it is now taking place. That's what I understand from your presentation. I think it is really given eye-opening to everyone, despite all the NGOs or the Muslims and also the civil society, regardless of religious background, opposed to what's happening against the Palestinian in the Middle East. So I think we would like to thank again Dr. Ahmad Al-Muhammady for sharing his thought on this. Now we open to questions from the viewers. I think there are the questions asking us whether they can ask in Bahasa Melayu or Bahasa Indonesia. By all means, you can do so. We have questions here from the chat here, from the those are here. It's from Yung Zeng Eng. Dalam bahasa Melayu ataupun Indonesia, I think in bahasa Melayu. Nak tahu pandangan daripada para speaker dalam perkembangan falsafah politik antara Israel dan serantau Nusantara. Asas pembentukan negara Israel adalah falsafah Zionisme yang dapat dilanggani oleh kaum Yahudi dan membentukkan jentera atas asas ini. Rasanya penentangan kita terhadap mereka dalam isu Palestin atau kerisauan normalisasi hubungan masihlah tersekat dalam tahap humanitarian sahaja, tapi tidak ada konsepsi intelektual dan intelektual diri yang dapat menentang kerangka Zionisme. Apa pandangan anda, is addressed to all the speakers, terhadap konsep Islam Nusantara sebagai salah satu konsepsi Nusantara yang dapat kemukakan kerangka falsafah sendiri, bukan hanya terhadap isu Israel, tetapi juga sesuaikan diri kepada geopolitik serantau kita yang agak majmuk. So I open to the speakers to respond to this question. So perhaps we can have Prof. Azyumardi to respond first.
I propose that Tuan Azmi answer first.
Okay, Tuan Haji.
Okay, thank you, Prof. I think for the last 7 decades of international discourse in this international debate, it has gone up to real demands put forward in the United Nations. There were more than probably almost 200 resolutions United Nations General Assembly and also in the United Nations Security Council. Very strong resolution has been put forward. But because of the political hegemony of Israel and the US and the Euro, they have developed a kind of a shielding mechanism to shield Israel by using the veto power, and also by defending Israel as always have been put up that they were victims of the Holocaust, and putting the demands of Israel that they have the right on the land of Palestinians because of their the way they interpreted the Torah, and they say that it is incumbent upon us as a Jewish religion, telling us that we have the right on the land. So they've mixed up on the political and the religious.
We're having a technical problem from Tuan Haji Azmi.
Then,
okay,
we have gone beyond humanitarian. Just one last word, Azam. We have gone beyond humanitarian. Of course, humanitarian look very visible. We are going and we are doing missionaries, mission trips and all that. But I think what we are always arguing in the Nusantara, that the right to self-determination, the right to freedom, the right to the land is always very clear, and therefore those have been the terms that we are using to defend Palestine and to put forward that unless and until it is free, then the resistance must go on.
Okay, thank you, Tuan Haji Azmi. Dr. Ahmad, you want to respond?
Yes, thank you very much, Azam, and also the person who asked the question. I believe it is a very good question about the Nusantara framework in managing the conflict. I believe that the Nusantara framework in managing the conflict is useful for us to be understood. It is global in nature and it is relevant. And I would like to mention there are 4 characteristics of Nusantara framework which is useful in managing the conflict. Number 1, we accept plurality of nation. We accept plurality of nation. If you look at the people in Southeast Asia, we do accept this plurality of nation. We have a multi-racial, multi-ethnic, multi-religious, multicultural society. That is number 1. This is the most important feature of the Nusantara uh, uh, characteristic. Second is not only that we accept plurality of nation, plurality of culture, religion, and so on, we also have the principle of mutual respectability. We respect each other. We respect each other. We respect each other's religion. We respect each other's nation. We do not go about killing others. So this is different from what is going on in the Middle East. They do not only that they do not accept the plurality of nation, which is the threat in Middle East right now. I would like to quote the statement by Ami Ayalon just now that I mentioned, in which he wrote in his book A Friendly Fire. He said that the biggest threat to Israel right now is from the extremist Israelis, so not the Palestinians. What does that mean? It means that they do not accept, to some people in there, they do not accept the plurality of nations. And not only that, they do not respect each other. In our context in Nusantara, we have this mutual respectability. Number 3, we also have this diversity as a source of strength. We are diversified. We are highly diversified, super diversified society, but we take it as a source of strength, not as a source of conflict. If you look at the Middle East, they make it as a source of conflict. They turn this diversity of nation into the source of. Of course, you can fight. You can fight for all centuries. And number 4 is Nusantara framework is civilizational. It is rooted in our identity, in our values, but we embrace other cultures. And I think this Nusantara framework should be the guiding principle or the framework that we should use in dealing with normalization if that happens. I believe that normalization campaign will continue for forever until the world embrace Israel and of course the Palestinian as well. So if that happened, what should be the guiding principle? The guiding principle should be this, Nusantara. We should we should promote the Nusantara framework in order to solve the conflict in the Arab nation. I think it will work, and I think that we should work on that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Ahmad. We move to the following questions by Fatih Kamal. Very short, but I think this is important questions. Why are we selective in isolating Israel and recognize other countries that robbed Muslim lands? Any response?
Yeah.
Yes, Prof.
Actually, I responded to the question. That in question and answer.
I see.
Yeah, actually, what I said that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict is a special case. Why? Because, of course, related to the first question, that Israel is based on the religious concept, religious belief on promised land.
Yeah.
And of course, the so-called promised land has been where is the promised land? Actually, the promised land has moved from one place to another. The first one, promised land, uh, was projected somewhere in Latin America, somewhere in Argentina, and then later moved to Africa, and of course the final so-called promised land is designated in Palestine at expense at the expense of the Palestinians. That's make the case of Palestinian and Israeli conflict is more than other situation of Muslim in other places like in Xinjiang or in Myanmar or something like that. If you look at the case of Myanmar, the Rohingya, for instance, uh, of course, that's very different from the Palestinian case. And also, I think the problem, why this Palestinian and Israel conflict cannot be solved, cannot be resolved peacefully. I think because of this unity among the Arabs. Yeah, of course we are in the Malay Indonesian archipelago have refused to open any kind of relation with Israel. Yeah. But of course we know that more and more Arab countries in the Middle East open or have actually a relation with Israel for many years, including of course Jordan, Egypt, Turkey, and also Qatar, and the latest one, of course, Arab Uni Emirate, that opened its embassy in Tel Aviv. So that's why one day the Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat stated that actually we have been victimized not only by Israel but also by the Arabs, because of Arab disunity. Why, for instance, the Israeli assault siege on Gaza last time? Actually, I appeal that the Arab or Middle Eastern Muslim countries like Egypt and also Turkey should, put their diplomatic relation on hold or threaten to break off their relation. But they did nothing actually. Actually, Turkey made a lot of profit from Israel, from tourism and also to trade. I think between I found a data actually. I think in May that Turkey, for instance, made something like $2 billion from January to May. Yeah? In trade and also tourism. Yeah. So that's make the problem becomes complicated. now, of course, no country will be able to stop Israeli confiscation of Palestinian land, even in the area close to Aqsa Mosque, for instance, that became the trigger point, actually, the last conflict in West Bank and also in Gaza. But the problem is becomes more complicated because of this unity between the Palestinian, between Hamas and Fatah. Actually, I don't know in Malaysia, but Indonesian government actually have tried to bring Hamas and Fatah to negotiating table in Jakarta and also in Bogor. When they met in Jakarta or Bogor, they just smile each other. But when they return to Palestine, you know, uh, they uh, they were involved again in conflict. There is a lot of disunity between these two group of Palestinians. So I think if we, I think only us, I mean Indonesia and Malaysia, that are consistently, support that consistently support Palestinian, while at the same time the Palestinians themselves, uh, you know, uh, do not want actually to make peace among themselves, among Palestinians. So this is the problem. So I don't know whether we will be able to to hold firmly to our uh, basic principle not to recognize Israel, not to make any kind of relation with Israel. I don't know in the future, because if many more and more Arab countries recognize Israel and then have their own embassies in Tel Aviv or probably in Jerusalem, like a U.S. embassy in Jerusalem, they move. U.S. moved, of course. Donald Trump moved U.S. embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and then what would we say? Malaysian and Indonesian government would say whether we will continue, stick strongly to our own principle. That's also the question for the future. Thank you, Pak. Terima kasih, Pak Azim, Pak Azam. Stop. Stop.
Okay, terima kasih. Thank you very much for your response, Prof. Azyumardi. Uh, I mean, do you want to respond any of the speakers, Tuan Haji Azmi or Dr. Ahmad? You want to respond to that question as well?
Do you have any other question? We go through other questions.
Okay. So there is one that I think we will share this one, despite Prof. Azyumardi has responded in the chat. It is from Jibril Fadianti. With the globalization and many exchange program offered by Western world, including funds to have more exposure on Israel Jewish, I think I need to rephrase that. How Muslim community in Nusantara react, and how is the diplomatic way to refuse the influences of Jewish, in our region, since they have invested a lot in this region. So in other way, how you want to, I mean, against of this move, despite they have lots of, investments in this region. I think basically from your presentation, all the speaker presentation shows that indicates that we have quite a number of, trading ties from companies that have, connected to Israel. So that would be the question. So any response for that? Prof. Azimadi has responded then, but if you want to share again with the audience.
I would add. Actually, I responded to this question. But I can add that Israel actually is very active to invite students to come to Israel to have program like Peace Camp. I know that some certain universities in Indonesia send delegate, student delegate to Israel to participate in the so-called peace camp in Israel. Even though I don't know, I think not in the last few years, but early this decade, I think Israel was very active, and then some universities in Indonesia send their students or young people or NGO activists to come to Israel, and also to have not only to to participate in the peace camp, but also in certain seminar on various issues. I don't know in Malaysia, but in Indonesia they are very active, even though not in the last 2 or 3 years. That's my addition.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Azyumardi. Tuan Haji, you would like to respond?
Well, I think there is a big understanding. There must be a very deep understanding of the whole issue, where the people who are very inclined to justice and peace would know that the implication of being, we are against this occupation, we are against this imperialism and all this colonization, and then they are using their strength to sort of, dangling some projects that show that this is apolitical, and therefore you should accept this cooperation in education, in culture, in science, technology. It sort of blurred our vision of what we want actually. We may succumb to that because say this is nothing to do with politics, so we have to come together. But Israel is a case, a very unique case of real transgression, real ignoring of justice and all the demands that have been agreed in the United Nations. So when we say that we have a kind of a moral duty that anything that to do with those things that will then benefit Israel, then we have to be very firm. We have to sacrifice in that sense that we have to refer to other countries. We have to work with other countries because Israel is doing such a very brutal and barbaric way of keeping the nation of Israel intact. So I think we have to become more alert in that, for everything. For instance, people were saying we do the BDS thing, the boycott, divers in sanction. People say, okay, well, what is that? I mean, you buy something that is made by Israel. It will not make any difference. But as a human being who knows what peace and what justice is about, the weapon of your right of consumption, that you don't want to buy this because it helps the Israeli. I mean, there's a moral kind of relevance and also rationale behind it. So the question is whether you should accept all these things. Then you should always discuss that there are other alternatives. We just want to send a very strong message to Israel that we cannot anymore tolerate this kind of barbarism that is still continuing on the Palestinians.
Okay, thank you very much. I think I need to, allocate the balance of time that we have. For each presenter, I will throw the questions that I got from the chat as well from the viewers. And that question, when the speaker responds, and at the end of that, perhaps you can also wrap up towards the presentation for tonight's program. So the questions would be addressed first to Dr. Ahmad in Bahasa. Saya is from Najib Zainal Abidin. Saya berpendapat dengan suasana politik dan keadaan dalam negara Malaysia lah, amat goyah. Apakah Israel dan sekutunya akan menawarkan sesuatu kepada Malaysia untuk menerima konsep normalisasi di masa kerajaan amat tertekan dengan perkembangan semasa? Dr. Ahmad?
Very much for the question. Yes, I agree that number one, the normalization campaign by Israel will continue until we submit to their demand. That is number one. I have no doubt at all that this normalization campaign will continue. It will continue and it will happen. Only the time will tell us when it is going to be a reality that Malaysia will take up the bites. Second, if that happen, what should we do? So I think this is a very important question. And I believe that Israel will use any possible means to achieve that, including offering Malaysia, whether directly or indirectly, things that we covet most, things that matters most. They know what matters most to Malaysia right now, and if they offer these things to Malaysia, definitely that Malaysia will not refuse. I want to close with one simple story, one example of how Israeli did this. If you remember Oman, they used to go through rebellion between families. Israeli diplomat by the name Ephraim Halavi approached the Sultan Qaboos in London, and he said this. He said, "We know you have a problem in Oman. Let me help you by providing arms and intelligence. You can regain the throne." And that exactly what he did. That happened in the 50s. Israel reaped the benefits today. So meaning that the seed was planted 20, 30 years ago, it will reap the benefit later on. I think this is what is going to happen to us as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Ahmad. Tuan Haji Azmi, um, the question addressed by Nasir Rahman to Tuan Haji, to what extent we can enter Gaza freely, and what help them if we normalize ties with Israel? Will normalization open the door wider to help Palestinians? Tuan Haji, please respond, and
Okay.
perhaps your last few words to wrap up
Okay.
your
Okay.
presentation for tonight's
Uh,
webinar.
Thank you, Nasir, who posed the question. We have to know the background of Gaza. You know, Gaza was occupied in 1967, and then the Israeli withdrew in 2006, and then they announced a total siege or a blockade in 2007. If you look at the policies since then, it's been very consistent till Netanyahu and now Naftali Bennett. The idea of releasing any inch of land that they have occupied will never be in their agenda at all. They will never give up any land that have been robbed by them. That is, period. So with that in mind, if you say that let's normalize and then you please dismantle this blockade, I don't think that will happen at all. They want to reoccupy Gaza. So the only thing that, I've been going to Gaza for several times. I'm going again, inshallah, for the next few days. It's a situation that there needs to be an international pressure that this is beyond universal human rights declaration. This has violated all international law. We have to mobilize the world to go against this. So going to Gaza is not easy until today. I mean, our Malaysian brothers have gone in and still not been able to go. I'm just waiting for the approval for the last probably since 2008, 2009, the war, 2012, 2014, and recently 2021 has been very devastating, and the security has been very difficult for anybody outside to come in. But anyway, the openings are there. We see some discussion that we are doing with several parties, especially the government of Egypt. So it's not easy, but I definitely will not see any opening if we normalize with Israel, then Israel will open up Gaza. No, they want to even expand more. They want to take every inch of even the deal of century is on this. They wanted that Palestinians just give up everything. You will have a new land for you. Somebody was saying about Sinai, and everybody you just give up whatever demand you have. So that is the concept that they have. My last word on this, normalization is an hegemony. It's a political hegemony. They wanted that, um, you must really know that there is one question that always trying to have a dialogue with our government. It is not about two-state solution. Even the Israel do not accept two-state solution. They don't want. So what more are we trying to, say to them and plead to them? There's no way that they want to enter this. Oslo Accord was a buying time strategy. And then that's it. And then they keep on pounding. They have settlements expanding and all that. There's no way that they want two-state solution. And two-state solution is something very unrealistic. So if you look on the ground, the kind of things that they do, the apartheid system that they have enforced, there's no way that you can see any way that they want to recognize the Palestinians. So the barbaric, the brutality, the atrocities are just, it is just in front of the world to see. So I think normalization will not be a price that we will say that we will gain anything for the Palestinians if we normalize with them. So normalization is something that we should see, that the Israeli wants to expand. They have this word that's called the Greater Israel or Israel Raya that has been always in their mind. So you have to understand this. The Nusantara area, I think we are the last bastion of the world that really will stand up and say no to any recognition of Israel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Tuan Haji. The last questions addressed to Prof. Azyumardi is from our FB viewers here from Sharifah Munira Al-Atas. What were the contents of the Jewish publication in Padang? And what were the causes that Jewish activism stood for in our region during that time? And then perhaps, Prof, after that, to wrap up our presentation tonight.
Thank you very much, Munira. Munira is my good friend at Columbia a long time ago. Together, of course, with Professor Muhammad Kamal Hassan, who is a senior of us. I haven't seen yet the publication. I can try to trace this the content of this magazine published in Padang, but it takes time. So I'm going to try to find it and in the archive here in Jakarta, National Archive in Jakarta. So for the time being, I cannot tell anything about the content of Eretz Israel published in Padang. So last sentence is I agree fully with Tuan Haji that as long as Israel continue its atrocities, robbing Palestinian land, and then also doing genocide in Gaza and other places in Palestine, I think it is not possible for us to accept Israel, to recognize Israel. I think there will be, if the Indonesian government plan to have trade relation, diplomatic relation, I think Muslims in general will oppose it. Yeah. So it will create problem for government if they plan to open a trade or diplomatic relation. As long as Israel continues with its atrocities on Palestinians. That's it. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much to all the speakers, Prof. Dr. Azyumardi, Azra, Tuan Haji Azmi Abdul Hamid, as well as Dr. Ahmad El-Muhammady for such fascinating presentations, and some of the points are quite also provocative. I think what we can say that the Israel attempts of normalization, act normalization in Nusantara, I think taking place and have taken place and is taking place. And I think the most important thing that the Nusantara states, in particular Malaysia and Indonesia, we have to be strong in terms of political stability as well as strong in economics. Uh, we don't have the opportunity to have a representative from Brunei to share this moment for this particular subject, but we know that Brunei will be something which is quite, strong in that sense because it is under the total monarchy systems, which I think it is quite difficult to penetrate. Whereas for Malaysia and Indonesia would be something different. Yes, we hope that whatever attempts that they have been made, we strongly firmly believe and we will counter that attempt that normalizations for the Israel will not take place in the future for this part of Nusantara. Thank you very much for all of you who have spent 2 hours of joining us with our, I can say it is a very fascinating presentations as well as quite number of important points that some of those would give us an eye opening. Thank you then.
Thank
Take
you.
care. Assalamualaikum
Waalaikumsalam
warahmatullahi
warahmatullahi
wabarakatuh.
wabarakatuh.
Assalamualaikum. Thank you.